Welcome back to another episode of Southern Utah University's Teaching and Learning Podcast. I'm your host, Matt McKenzie, and today we're going to be talking to Assistant Professor Chelsea Gambles to discuss pre-learning strategies that we as faculty can use when addressing tough conversations in our classrooms or difficult topics. Join us now as we delve further into this topic. Welcome back to the Center for Teaching Innovation podcast. This week we are talking to Chelsea Gambles, who teaches in SUU's Family Life and Human Development. I'm so used to calling it FLHD that I have to slow myself down. Chelsea presented at our May Learning and Development event and had some great tips for faculty on pre-learning strategies. Chelsea, you want to take a moment and introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, thanks for having me. So I am a licensed clinical social worker and spent the bulk of my career in clinical private practice doing mental health therapy. And that's relevant. We'll get to why probably in this chat. But because it's really taking a lot of those principles of how we prepare folks for therapy and applying them to how we prepare for folks to learn about really difficult, emotionally charged, challenging topics. And so, I did private practice for a long time, then came over to SUU at CAPS, so the Counseling Center, Counseling and Psychological Services, and spent about 5 years there. And then when we started the Bachelor of Social Work, which is now in its second year of the cohort, I thought it would be really cool to come over and start kind of helping train up young professionals. So yeah, awesome. That's how this was kind of born.
Great. So pre-learning strategies.
Yeah.
What are we talking about?
Okay, so there's three in this. I mean, it's a wide umbrella, right?
Right. Yeah, everything usually is, right?
Yeah, for sure. And in this content that we're talking about, I've broken it down to three main concepts. The first, and in turn, goals. So there's some other objectives, but three main goals. We're talking about emotional regulation, critical thinking skills, and then critical self-reflection skills. So quickly, I mean, emotional regulation, the idea is, and should I give you maybe a little context of?
Yeah, please.
Okay.
Please.
Okay. So so the context is, I'm working at CAPS, Counseling and Psychological Services, and COVID happens. And everyone always laughs. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. That was only 4 years ago.
I know, it's wild, huh?
Yeah.
So we moved to online therapy for a time. And we had to reduce our session limits because we had just reduced resources, essentially. And so everyone on staff is looking at how to make this serve and how to stretch our resources as far as we can. And one of the things that we started talking about was this idea of how in short-term therapy, it starts to feel like you're kind of a triage center, like you're the Instacare, and you're spending most of the time just getting people ready to do therapy. And you're talking about norms, and you're talking about what's expected and how to be vulnerable and all of these kind of social and emotional skills that folks need that you really don't quite get to the work. So we, myself and Emma White, another intern, developed this model for how to essentially a class that students had to take before they could start therapy, just mainly to give them the best bang for their buck. So then I move over into teaching social work 1010. And I'm a trained clinician, and I'm also a very direct therapist, which is different than many. And I'm thinking we're just going to jump in the deep end here. I'm like, not realizing that here I am. My main students are freshmen, primarily raised in rural southern Utah, right? That's my demographic. Pay attention, Chelsea. And I wasn't. And right. I'm like, all right, let's start talking about white privilege, right? And let's talk about substance use. Like I'm suggesting to students really difficult concept or ideas, like the idea that substance use isn't is more invested in survival than it is in self-harm. And I'm suggesting these kind of social abusive system is around how we provide housing first, for example, for homeless folks, and meanwhile asking them to be mindful of their own privilege. And we're talking about abusive system, including religious abusive systems. And my first semester, all of my feedback was like, you attacked my religion, you attacked me. Like this wasn't, not all of my feedback, but if I got negative feedback, it was that.
And I know what you're talking about. I teach one of the education courses on school, society, and diversity.
Okay.
And so I know what you're talking about.
Yep.
We have these heavy topics, sometimes controversial.
Sure.
And what we like you said, we just jump in and it's like, boom.
Yep. Yeah, I'm just like, and every week when something would come up, like the convocation speaker issue that happened that year, or there's just several things that year. And this year we've had several House bills and things like that. To me, it's like the classroom should mimic everyday life learning. And so I'm like, let's talk about it. And I have students leave the classroom crying. And not that that necessarily means it was the wrong intervention, but what I had to do in my own holding myself accountable, it's the same idea as a therapist. I don't practice any model that I haven't been a patient of. I sort of tried to hold myself accountable in that same sense. And so I'm like, okay, if I can be critically self-reflective here, how can I be more accountable to my students? Because my main burnout at CAPS, and the main reason why I transferred, was it became difficult to hold students accountable in the short-term model, in just a myriad of different demographic kind of bureaucracy type things. I didn't feel like I could hold them accountable. I'm not burned out in my private practice, but I am on the university therapy, right? So I'm like, how do I hold myself accountable, right? And I realized that I had not done all of those principles that I was taught about in therapy, like a big one being informed consent, right? This idea of you're adequately educated on what's the risks and the benefits of what you're choosing to opt into. I wasn't doing that for my students. Yes, we have all these disclaimers in our syllabi, but not the informed consent for like a math class. Yes, we might need to talk about emotional regulation, right?
Right.
But some of those other kind of nuanced interpersonal skills look a little different. And so I realized that I had not done my best to prepare students. And so I dove into what worked while I was at CAPS and transferred that model over. So emotional regulation is, how can you stay in the room, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things so there's different goals within each one, but one of the ways we do that is a mindful minute. And I offered faculty like all the resources, and I have hundreds of mindful minutes. And I'm just asking students to spend 5 minutes to practice, to build their own toolkit. Some things will work for you, some things you won't. But I'm also normalizing discomfort. So I'm talking a lot about how maybe you meditated and you felt anxious. That doesn't mean it didn't work, right? We hear that all the time in CAPS, like meditation didn't work because I felt anxious. No, you were already anxious, right? Now you're addressing it.
Now you know what that feeling's like, yeah.
And you can acknowledge, and then if you don't know there's a problem, you can't solve it, right?
Right.
So a lot of those things to help students just even stay in their seat, right? And even not fall into cognitive kind of dissonance, right? Or collapse even. So that's the first step. And then we go to critical thinking skills, where we're just looking at perspective taking and how to consider a different view. And I'd love to talk a little bit about how I'm now using AI if there's time.
Absolutely, yeah.
But we're implementing that now. So once I kind of got that, now I had the scaffolding. Now I have all these tools through your office and through Andrea's VR cohort, like to kind of do some of that stuff. And then critical self-reflection. So, how to kind of critically evaluate what you're thinking, how to have what we call, this is Susan David's concept of emotional agility, and how to have nuance kind of, we also use DBT, that stands for dialect behavioral. We love our acronyms in therapy.
Education is the same way. We
You're
have
absolutely
alphabet
right.
soup everywhere.
Every meeting I'm in with education folks, I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about right now. So yes, that. Yeah. But it's how to think dualistically, right? And how to use language that conveys dualistic thinking. So two things can be true at the same time. You can absolutely value your religion and love it, and you can identify parts that have been harmful, or you can know that your parents did their best and have needed more. You can be independent and need help, and things like that. So so what I did was categorize, like in this, it's like 14 years of my practice, really. I tried to put it into something that faculty could digest easily and say, okay, these are maybe some things that I think my students need. And again, in the sense of a toolbox, take what you think they need, what they don't. And then the idea is that through the semester, you're slowly spoon feeding some of these skills. And it really has, like, next year I'm teaching diversity in family systems, and it's my first time. And this summer I'm reading A Place Called Home by David, I can't think of his last name, but he's like Google's community engagement person, and his memoir is about being homeless for most of his life. It's an exceptional read.
Oh, wow.
But it's very challenging. And so I'm talking to my department chair this summer. I really want to do like a book club around this book. I think it shows systems so adequately. But in talking with Sarah Allen, my department chair, who's just genius and really helpful, I'm like, okay, so she showed me how she was doing that. And I realized like, okay, I can set this towards the end of the semester. And while I'm teaching them the skills around systems and micro, macro, meso ideas, I can also be developing and hopefully building some scaffolding around, how to actually hear this stuff.
Right.
Because I can't tell you how often I have students say things like, I didn't complete my assignment because it was too hard. Like emotionally, and right. Introspectively too difficult.
Well, and getting back to what you said earlier, this is stuff that our students are going to face when they get out into I hate saying the real world, but yes. When they get out into their field of study mm-hmm. and they have a job, they're going to run into things that are going to be very frustrating, very
yes.
Emotionally charged.
Yes.
And they're going to have to know how to handle that.
Yes. And one of my biggest challenges has been all degrees promise things and convey a competency around things, but we're also leading people into a licensure. And so when I have students say things like, I couldn't complete my life reflection, it's a big assignment in human behavior and social environment where they have to identify one thing in their life and then explain theory and how it can inform how that impacted their life. I have students say, I couldn't finish that. It's their final because it was too emotionally charging for me. And I have to go, but you're going to have to sit across from someone who's going to tell you that they're being abused, right? That's the biggest demographic of what bachelors of social workers are doing is, welfare of some kind, social justice issues.
And I hadn't even thought, I'm sitting here listening to you, and I hadn't even thought of the idea of they're going to be a counselor and what happens when they have that person who comes in.
Right.
And that experience that you've struggle to deal with individually.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking more in terms of like my area. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's
yeah. And they're going to have to do that with diverse populations where they don't have that lived experience. And if they only have the skill set to look at it through their lens, they're going to do a lot of harm. Okay. We have to understand that there's other perspectives that we can't understand entirely. And we have to have the skill set to be able to perspective take. It's so important to not. And I talk a lot in my work in teaching about the harm that I have caused and all the former clients that I want to apologize to, right? But we want to do our best to mitigate that. So. Yeah.
So how do we do that work? How do we, that's great.
$1 million question in my mind.
I mean, what steps can faculty at SU, because let's face it, there are whether it's School of Business, chemistry, these are skills that students need.
I think so.
How do we prepare our students? Like, what are the steps or goals that we should be aiming for as faculty?
Okay. Yeah, that's a great question.
Or adjunct. I'm only adjunct faculty, so adjunct faculty or faculty.
Yeah. So I think this is probably a cheesy canned answer, but I truly believe the best way that faculty can prepare their students is the same answer as what I tell young people who want to be therapists. Do the work yourself. So be more mindful of your own biases, your own privileges. I mean, to me, step one is awareness. And I don't think you can ask or cultivate an environment where there's awareness if you aren't doing that work as well. So for me, the first step is self-awareness, and then it's the daily kind of committed practice of how do I think again. There's so many amazing tools out there. Harvard University has a really great one that I just recently got informed to, but we're looking at like Adam Grant's How to Think Again, right?
Yeah.
And Susan David's Emotional Agility, and like I said, the DBT, dualistic thinking. And then, so those are like kind of the tools. But then the foundational skills that need to be there next to awareness. So to me, awareness is kind of the foundation, which mindfulness tools foster that. Right. And then it's this ability to critically self-reflect. So again, we are always going to, and we shouldn't take away one's instincts, right? And we shouldn't take away their perspective. So we're always going to see it initially through our lens, but it's what we do after that. And so we can't recalibrate and adjust the things that maybe we got wrong or whatever if we don't have some practice for being critically self-reflective. And while the university asks for that in the form of course evals,
Right.
I wouldn't say that's the most effective way to encourage faculty to really critically self-reflect. It's probably the best thing that we have, but so I think if faculty members can cultivate their own practice. So I know most of the amazing faculty that I work alongside have their own separate kind of evaluation tools, and they're regularly trying to seek feedback. I love at the start of my classes when I'm pulling my crap up on Canvas and acting like I'm not listening to listen to students. You learn a ton. It's so often that I'll hear them saying things about other classes. He did this, or he said that, or he should have done that. And I try to foster safety with my students, so I don't necessarily expose them in any way, but I will certainly try to reflect on, okay, what are some things that maybe they're saying that I've done, or sometimes I'll, just ask, like, I'd love to learn.
Yeah.
So in a more concise answer is really practicing it yourself, being emotionally regulated. I think it's Gabor Mate who said that having attachment figures in your life who have emotional regulation is a type of generational wealth that we don't talk enough about. And so I think sometimes faculty can become attachment figures, 1, and 2, we are modeling whatever we're asking for. And that's how we know developmentally, that's how the most impactful way that we change or influence people's behavior. So to me, practicing what you preach is, and I'm not good at it, I just work really hard at it.
No, and it is. I mean, that was one thing that as I was looking through your PowerPoint and your proposal and everything, that grow critical self-reflection.
Yeah.
Even with staff, one thing we do in our department during our annual evaluation period is they have 3 weeks to reflect on questions that I'm going to ask them. Okay. So they get a survey that they have to take time. They can go and look at the questions and kind of write it down to the side and then come back to it. But they have to take that time to reflect on, did I grow as a professional?
Yeah.
One of my favorite questions to ask my team is, what was your favorite failure?
Oh, I love that. Sure.
What was the thing that you learned the most from? That, it hurt at the moment. Yeah. But coming out of it now, looking back, you're like, man, I'm so much better because of that. And that was the first time I did it 5 years ago. I think my team thought I was crazy. Because
masochistic.
Yeah. And they're like, I can't talk about all the good things I did. Yes, you can. And so we had to take, same thing you've been talking about. I jumped into that deep end. Yep. I had to take with that self-reflection because I'm thinking, okay, we're all adults. We can all self-reflect. No, we had to take a step back and talk about, what does self-reflection look like? Is it bragging to say, here are all my accomplishments? Yep. No.
Yep. How can we be vulnerable?
Right.
Yep. Vulnerability is another concept.
Yeah, that vulnerability of, I made a mistake and it actually turned out to be a wonderful thing. Yeah. So that was... I think even when we talk about non-traditional students,
absolutely,
we assume that they have all these skills when they walk into us, and they don't.
Yep. And I think one of the beautiful things about all of those skills too is students will come at different trajectories, and be varied on the spectrum in terms of their own skill sets, and if you're fostering an environment that cultivates this, then students are also educating other students, right? And we all would probably say we learn more from our students than they learn from us. And I hope that that's true for students across students too, right? I'm picturing as we're talking other different things students have taught other students, and when I'm working through some of this stuff, and it's super impactful, I think. So.
Now you brought up the use of technology.
Yeah.
And I know that you're part of Andrea's AR/VR cohort, so I'm really curious to hear about that and what you're thinking in that
Andrea,
realm.
I said her name wrong. I apologize.
Oh.
Andrea. I love her. We're friends
She's wonderful.
now. But yeah, anyway.
As well as AI.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I got a fire lit under me during Kyle Dillon from your office, his presentations, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is brilliant, 1, but 2, like perfect for what I want to do. So, and now I'll sometimes text Andrea like after hours and be like, this is another idea that I have, or I found this thing and it works really good with what Kyle showed me. And so, and your office does a beautiful job of integrating all those tools.
Thank you.
So I really appreciate that because it energizes me in a way that other things really don't. So I start the cohort. I'm talking with Andrea about all these different resources, and some of the ones that I'll be using, we're hoping to use the, is it Body Swaps?
Yeah, Body Swap. Well, I know Body Swaps is one of the softwares that she uses quite a bit.
We're definitely using Body Swaps for the ethics, but it's no, I'm not sure. It's maybe anyway. We're going to use it in sexuality, where they use it in anatomy and physiology, where you can actually look at the anatomy of the sex organs and explore that way. So I'm going to do that for my sexuality class, and then for my diversity class, it's Body Swaps that we're using. And I found one through Stanford University called We Live Here. Have you heard of it?
I haven't.
I guess We Live Here is an offshoot of it. Okay. I can't remember what Stanford's direct one was called. It's exceptional. So it puts you in a tent and you're a homeless person. And it is so real. And if you've never tried AI, because I hadn't, which they were all really excited for me to try on the goggles because I'd never done it, I was like, wow. And I still very much am. But it brings you scenarios. It brings you a case scenario of why you ended up homeless. And then it brings you day to day. Like, for example, a woman sitting in her tent and she's got a Bunsen burner and she's got her whole life set up in this tent. And someone comes in and the cops are coming to raid again. And she's like, well, I'm not leaving. He's like, no, you'll get arrested again. You're going to lose all your stuff. So she gets up and it simulates her running and hiding and then coming back and all of her things have been destroyed and just starting over and all of those kinds of things. So, and then the Body Swaps app that I'm going to use is it'll take persons of marginalized populations and you role play an ethical scenario. So they're talking to you, there'll be a person in a wheelchair, for example, or a person of color, and they'll give you their kind of life story and you have to make sense of it as like a caseworker. So I'm exploring that this summer. Then I'm emailing with Kyle and we're working together. We had a meeting and we're working together on the, what's it called, where you guys did it for the BHT grant, where you go in Canvas and you watch a simulation. Is it, Kyle's told me 1 million times and I will never remember the name.
Where you watch a simulation.
Yeah, so you can write the script for it. We did it on Jamboard, and then Avatar plays it out.
Oh, Articulate. Storyline Articulate.
Yes,
yeah.
That's what it is. So I'm talking to him about that, and so me and my brilliant TA are working together on how to write the script. So I write all these ethical scenarios. And and it's way more complex. I'm making it harder than it probably needs to be than the BHT, but that's the behavioral health tech grant. So that's early intervention. This is like, we're getting close to having our bachelor's in social work. We're going to be caseworkers. So it's going to be more interactive, but essentially we're writing the script and they're going to have an avatar play that out. Because the biggest thing in ethical simulations is, yes, we want you to do your internship, but we want to mitigate the harm that you're causing to real people. Yes, you're going to make mistakes and you're going to be privileged and you're going to make, all the things that we're trying to prevent. So meanwhile, I'm like, this is brilliant because I can use that Articulate resource to handwrite scripts, right? And they're exactly what I want them to say. So I'm taking all my ethical dilemmas from my whole clinical practice and I've already written them out. And he's going to make these avatars that look like diverse populations, people that you've maybe never even sat across from if you were just raised in Cedar City, Utah. And they're going to be telling you your story and you get certain scenarios and it's this interplay back and forth. And then I'm going to have them come in once a week and check out the Oculus and practice with, I don't get to write those scripts. Andre has told me there are some where we can maybe work towards that, but right. I'm essentially overlapping the two resources so that they can have a more hands-on practice. And then I'm working with Kyle to do the... I also forgot the name of this, but it's when you're like watching a guest speaker video and then in the middle or of video and then it pauses.
Anodo.
Yeah, Anodo. Yeah. So I'm doing that because I have in my 1010 class, I have 14 guest speakers come in because it's a survey course. You're supposed to learn about social work. So I have 14 guest speakers come in and talk about their career. And it's a lot of work to coordinate and everything. But since I have to film a bunch of those so that we can do this part because the audio the technology wasn't there, I'm like, now I can pick guest speakers who are going to support these other role plays and these ethical dilemmas that they'll later get.
So they're going to experiment in AR, VR, and
Yes.
then listen to someone speak on a similar topic.
Yes.
Brilliant.
That's the hope.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a lot
You'll
of
do
moving
it.
parts.
I have no doubt that you and Kyle will pull this one off.
I have a lot of faith in us.
Yeah. No, I think we have to think about, that use of AR, VR, and you kind of mentioned it. And I know that my wife, Jen, who teaches special education, she used 360 cameras, and they set it up in the middle of a classroom so that students could practice doing an observation before they actually went in and had to do an observation, so that they weren't causing a scene in the classroom or causing. Now, obviously, anyone that's been in a classroom knows that when someone new comes in, everyone's attention's on that person.
Yeah.
But they got that chance to move the camera around and look around and kind of decide, this is what I'm going to watch, and do that stuff ahead of time so they could practice and have the skills to go in. But I mean, that's really what we're talking about here with the pre-learning skills, right?
Right.
Setting our students up for success, no matter what our topic is, so that they can deal with heavy topics. They can deal with topics that might be intimidating to them. You mentioned math.
Exactly.
I know way too many people that when it comes to math, they get nervous. So,
me included. Yep. And also another thing that I thought of as you said that is, you're also scaffolding and building a place in which you can give your students feedback, which in those teaching simulations, I'm sure you have to, and we have to. So when you are in your internship, so I supervise BSW students, right? And sometimes I have to say, that was, a homophobic statement, or, that was a little microaggression or something like that. But if I've already established this kind of feedback and I've established safety, because just like in therapy, we establish safety by informed consent. So I'm telling you as much as I can. And the best thing I can do for your nervous system is tell you what it's going to look like along the way to the extent that I can. And then I'm going to own if I get it wrong. One of the biggest harms I've done in therapy is when I've committed to a client and then been like, you need more therapy than I can give you, or I can't see you. That's a rupture in the relationship, right?
Right.
So and then the collaborative contracting piece, which is we are consistently working together to create a contract that works for you and me. So it also sets you up to hold your students accountable. And that's, to me, that's how I don't get burned out.
When we come back, I want to take a quick second and talk more about that contract aspect of things.
Sure.
Because I'm really intrigued by that idea.
Okay.